so much for joining us.
Thanks, Finn. Looking forward to it.
Me too. Could you just start by telling us a bit about your background and what you specialize in today?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the last 16 years, I've been a clinical psychotherapist, and I specialize in the space of self-image and nutritional psychology. So really helping people understand, one, how their minds work, and also secondly, how their first brain works, which is what I call our gut. Okay. So definitely linking the gut-brain connection axis between mental and physical health. Yeah. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's a real nutshell. That's a real nutshell. So what brought you to that?
Well, great question. So I was in corporate for over 20 years and in sales background, operational management. And I'd always had a very interesting view on people's mindset, why they did a certain role or why they would say yes or no. So, also had family with mental health issues for many, many years. And it was just always something that I just found quite fascinating and why people do what they do and why they have certain patterns of behaviors. So after I had my first child at 33, I realized that I didn't really want to work for anybody anymore and decided that, I wanted to open up new pathways to understand how our minds work. So I did that. And I basically went into the psychology model for the first, about 18 months. But for me, something just didn't really align with just that psychology element. And then I met a psychotherapist who literally blew my mind in 2 hours. And I was just like, wow, okay, now I've found my path.
What was she saying?
Well, it was actually, he was a mentor of mine. So I went to a seminar where literally it was just more about, do you know your conscious mind, your unconscious mind, and also how your energetic body works with those two things. No one had ever said to me that our unconscious mind is 90% of our power that we have every single day and that we operate on autopilot. And secondly, how my self-image was developed, which is a really, really important thing because most human beings were developed with a very poor and conflicted self-image. And when I say self-image, I'm not just talking about the external one you see in the mirror. I'm also talking about the one that we hold unconsciously within ourselves and that really either hinders us or it takes us on an amazing journey of self-discovery. But it's just understanding our patterns and that there's nothing wrong with us. And we just need to really understand our programming. So I just sat there and went, whoa, makes sense. And then he also said to me, however, if you really want to help people fully for a long time, you also need to understand the nutritional element of how your brain works with your gut. And that literally is about helping and what food is for fuel.
Sorry, you cut out just briefly there.
Sorry.
If you could just say the last 5 seconds again.
Yeah. It was just really understanding about what food is in relation to fuel and how our mental and physical health need nutrients to actually survive, which again, in a psychology model, most mainstream psychology don't link food with mental health, especially things like anxiety and depression. And even now, so much research is coming out with relation to schizophrenia and bipolar. And so it's a very powerful tool. So over 16 years ago, that's where I started. So, wow. 4 years of just head down, study, and I'm still doing it. So now I'm just completing a qualification in nutritional psychiatry as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, that's one of the things that really stood out to me because I came across your work on Instagram and I was browsing through and, it's sort of slightly linked. I'm a big fan of Paul Saladino as well, Dr. Paul Saladino, and the carnivore diet. And I'm a big fan of meat as a big base of nutrition, good quality red meat. And I've always been very suspicious of veganism. And when I was looking through your profile, I was like, this is a vegan's worst enemy right here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So and I've interviewed a few vegans before, and I'm just thinking like, wow, this would be a great conversation to have these guys going head to head. But in terms of, you mentioned nutritional psychiatry. I mean, what is nutritional psychiatry?
So basically, the two main elements, excuse me. So nutritional psychology is really about understanding where our attachments come to food and where we learn those from. And a lot of that time, we learn those behaviors with food as children. So, we actually get told to have treats as kids. So it's like if we're in an emotional breakdown or we fall over, most parents will give their kids sugar or here's a lollipop, stop crying. So we really learn really unhealthy connections between food and, again, hyper-processed foods and sugars. And if you're shopping in the middle aisle of a supermarket, you're undernourished. That's not food. So we learn those really deep root cause patterns, as in when we have emotions, we feed them instead of actually feeling them and going through them. So a lot of the time when we use an external source, we're ignoring the root cause and what our body and our emotions are trying to tell us. Now, in relation to the deeper root cause of nutritional psychiatry, it's actually using nutrition as therapy. So what we're doing, and every single person that I work with, most people are coming from a really sad diet, which is what I call the standard Australian or American diet. Again, moderation and rainbow diet. That was invented. There's no such thing as moderation if you're addicted to junk food. It's not good for your brain.
100%.
Yeah. So it literally is re-educating and understanding and really giving power back to people to go, hold on, do you understand what your gut needs in relation to amino acids, where that comes from, what your body needs from food, what amino acids you can make yourself, and also to how that creates neurotransmitters in relation to things like serotonin, your dopamine, GABA pathways. So every single person is unique, depending on, how long they've been nutritionally starved for. And again, when people talk to me about anxiety or depression, that generally is an external symptom of a really deep root cause issue around self-image. And secondly, what we're feeding ourselves every day. So a lot of people feed themselves in a very chaotic state. But from a psychiatry point, we look at that gut-brain connection and that beautiful pathway and highway that needs to be fueled correctly. Otherwise, you just don't work. And protein, I always work on a very low carb with a lot of people, and also into a carnivore way of eating, because it is the most, what I call, human proper way of eating. We are a species, and we need to eat a species appropriate diet.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's with all of my clients, we've always worked from a baseline of, okay, let's see how we're doing. Let's see how your nutrition is. Let's see what we might need to change to get the results that we want to get. And we change from there. And as time goes on, it's generally always been a removal of carbohydrates and a removal of junk and a movement towards higher protein in order to, my main focus as a trainer, the really easy blood work I could do was just a finger prick glucose test, a fasting blood glucose test, and just have a look at an indication of insulin sensitivity. And just to have a look at that level of blood work. But it's fascinating that so much of the quote unquote health Instagram influencer world is focused on like a high plant-based diet and a vegan-based diet. And I mean, it's really beggars belief. And many of the things that you're saying about, having high meat in the diet and focusing on animal fats is absolutely chastised and vindicated, or absolutely chastised in the press. So I just wonder, what is it that we need to communicate to people to get that across? What are we lacking? What are we missing?
Well, I think the vilification of meat, and a lot of your viewers may not know this, but, when we go back as far as, the early 1960s, where, 2 Harvard scientists were paid off to basically say that sugar was okay and saturated fat was bad. So that's really where it started. And that's where a lot of the nutritional networks came from, and was based on the fact that, if we think about meat's been around for millions and millions and millions of years. And now we're blaming one of the most powerful nutrients for modern disease. We're not looking at seed oils. We're not looking at hyper processed foods and sugars and corn syrup and fructose. And, there's not a lack of medication, right? We're over medicated, but we're undernourished society. And the thing is, if we go back to basics, we as human beings, we are protein and fat and muscle and skeletal bones. right? That's what we are, and that's what we need to survive. So our brains are fat. So even if you kind of link the issues of type 2 diabetes and depression and anxiety with a low fat diet, the correlation's there, right? You can see it. But the other thing with the plant-based movement, I just, again, belief structures can be very, very powerful when you have a belief around the fact that, you know, all of a sudden now the cows belching in a field is causing climate change, which is just ridiculous in itself, right? When we think, okay, so then we go make lab-based meat in a factory. Sure. Okay. Yep. That makes sense. But again, it's all propaganda. It's all driven by money. You know, one of the biggest well-known vegans in the world called Rich Roll. I don't know if you know him.
I don't know him.
Yeah, so he's a very big advocate for the reality of veganism. So he had a podcast around 18 months ago where he was talking to a cow farmer and also an avocado farmer, and basically, you know, said, if you think that eating a vegan diet is not killing animals, you're delusional. So he's a vegan himself, but he's very, very well aware that, you know, as an agricultural base, animals die and they in their millions, right? But again, unless you really want to scratch the surface and look at really what the belching and the methane is versus fossil fuels, and some really good references for your listeners would be The Sacred Cow, and also Kiss the Ground. Very, very, very good documentaries with real resources, real links around, you know, where that data gets skewed from. And it's not by accident. Like when you look at people who have been on a very, very bad diet, and then they come off that and their, you know, type 2 diabetes reversed, or their anxiety goes away, or the depression disappears, you know, that's not by accident. That's because the body is being fueled correctly. And again, if we look at plant-based agriculture, you know, it's covered with glyphosate. There's a new research study just come out of the US where over 80% of children's urines were tested and it was full of glyphosate. Now, where does that come from? It comes from plants.
Yeah. I mean, it's this crazy, it's each end of the spectrum is neither better or worse than the other, because in any monoculture system, or huge industrialized system, you have these huge swathes of waste and huge swathes of sort of toxins that have to be used to prop up the system. So it either in monoculture, soybean and wheat and barley and rapeseed and canola oil and all of palm seed oil and all of this stuff that is ultimately going to, in many cases, feed a poor quality meat as well. So it's both of the two, and their extreme levels are intertwined and negative. But it's this whole swathe of people who say that all meat is wrong, which is just the you know, just totally crazy, as you say. And on the other side, the people that say, you know, that only meat is right. And I don't think one is right, is correct. Either of those is correct.
Look, I'll always come from a space, Finn, of where, you know, when we talk about grass-fed meat versus, you know, grain-fed meat, and, you know, most cows will be grain-fed up to somewhat inward of 100 to 70 days, you know, just to make them a little bit fatter. And, you know, that's okay. But also, too, it's just about getting the quality source, whether it's regenerative agriculture, and really asking a butcher and be smart about it, like where the meat comes from, the ethical practices. And, you know, I think the other skewed view there is that, you know, all cows live in feedlots all their life. They actually don't. But again, it's just the view of what particular organizations are just driving out for people to catch on to. But again, you know, if you look at the data around, you know, the amount of deficiencies in just a plant-based diet, and there is bioavailability protein and there isn't. So it is about getting the highest, best source. But as you've just pointed out, a lot of my clients do amazing on high protein centric way of eating with fat, and they have some low carb vegetables in there. But you know what? They've educated themselves on to actually understand what quality am I getting? You know, how long have these been sitting in the supermarket? Because if you feel most vegetables, I know I sound like a weirdo right now, but I go around and I squeeze the vegetables, but I'm like, no, that's we all do. Really we all do soft and disgusting, right? So for me, I've been a carnivore now for over 2.5 years, and for me, reversing my insulin resistance and coming from a very high bodybuilding background.
And just, I'll interrupt you there. When you say you're coming from a carnivore diet, you're exclusively eating meat, or you're having some vegetables, or what's your diet there?
I'm 0 carb and plant-free for over 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm literally ground beef, steak, ribeyes, fatty meats, butter, eggs. I'll eat 1 or twice a day. It just depends on my hunger signals. And again, when you remove all that dopamine reactive, chaotic food, you actually start to learn what your true signals are with hunger, because you're not depleting yourself either of serotonin. So the other thing with meat, which a lot of people may not know, is that it holds the most 9 amino acids. Sorry, I'm just feeling.
Oh yeah, you're sort of going up to heaven there. I can see.
I am like, sorry about that. But red meat itself holds the most powerful 9 amino acids that we need for our gut to convert into those neurotransmitters, and especially serotonin, which is over 92% of it is made in your gut, which a lot of people don't know either. It's not produced only from your brain. But again, I drink water. I may have electrolytes every now and again. I weight train 5 days a week because I just love it. That's my meditation time.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, right. So, but again, like you touched on earlier, every single person is unique, and especially with food. But if you are sick and you have type 2 diabetes, or you have insulin issues, and most root causes of most diseases these days is found in insulin resistance long term, because we are eating foods that aren't food. They're food-like substances, which also exacerbate thought, thinking, and feeling behaviors. So that's why when I work with people, psychology model is just generally here, right? Now, you can't talk or go through processes with a starving body and a brain. So you've got to understand that those two pathways need to be connected.
And I'll just roll you back. You said 2 years ago, because we're going to come back to the gut-brain connection as well, because I think that's fascinating. But you said 2 years ago you changed to the carnivore diet. Like, what sparked that? Were you having issues? Like, what that? Because in most people's minds, 90% of the population, they're gonna be like, that's a pretty drastic change.
It's like,
yeah,
and it's quite funny. It's like when people go, oh my gosh, that's so restrictive. I'm like, well, actually, no, if you're on borderline type 2 diabetic, it's not restrictive. And this is the other thing when we get society's words and restrictions, and most of the time when we use diet, people's brains go, oh my gosh, that's restrictive. But if you're sick and those foods are making you sick, you need to get off them, because it's a form of self-respect, right? Even though you think that, oh gosh, it's healthy, it's actually not. So for me, I have a long-term history with the bodybuilding industry. So I did that for many years. And then obviously, standard kind of diets was, your carbs to build your muscle and protein. And I don't ever want to see a piece of chicken again. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, I'm getting that.
Or broccoli. Yeah, no. So in lockdown, actually, it was just towards lockdown, I was just constantly hungry. And I would eat and I'd be like, something's going on here. I'd get hangry and I'm like, okay. And I'm eating, every couple of hours. And I'm like, no, something's wrong. So I went to my doctor and he did a blood test, and he came back to me and he said, Natalie, you're borderline type 2 diabetic. I'm like, hold on, I'm 69 kilos. What's going on? So I ended up finding out just through my own research. I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. So I ended up finding Paul Mason in Sydney, who's a doctor and is advocating a high protein carnivore way of eating for reversing those type of, man-made diseases, really. So I was just like, oh, it all makes sense. That's fine. I love meat, no problem. So I'm very clear on the values of my body, both mentally and physically. So for me, it was just like, right, I'm in 30 days, started that next day. And literally I thought, oh, we'll see how we go. But within 2 weeks, I had never felt as alive and as alert, and just hunger stopped. I felt so much better. And that was, 2.5 years ago.
And in there, presumably you're eating, liver and kidney and bone broths, and like, what's your sort of cooking schedule? I mean, how are you prepping with this?
Yeah, I don't tend to do bone broth just because it can be high in histamine. And for me, my gut reaction's not great. So I also many years ago also had a thing called idiopathic urticaria, which is where my histamine just went crazy for 2 years. So I'm very well aware that I don't want to actually trigger any of that. So bone broth doesn't exist for me. I love liver. I love ox heart. Kidneys every now and again, bacon, and I use marrow. So I get marrow bones and I roast them off with salt and butter and put that on top of my steak. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And again, when you start eating what I call a species appropriate way of life, you just function on, all cylinders, and you don't crave. I don't crave anything. I'm not hungry unless I need to eat. And then I stop when I'm full. And that's it. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's strange because so much of our society now, or many people's eating habits seem to be almost on like autopilot and almost like an addiction scale. It's you're eating to soothe emotional pain. I think you touched on it earlier, but you're stressed, you're at work, you're at your desk, people are doing jobs they don't really want to do. And it's an easy, like quick serotonin or dopamine buzz, like have a bit of cake, have a bit of chocolate, have some sweets.
Yes.
So it's very, and our system and our society is not set up to provide people with a good quality steak at lunchtime or a good quality piece of liver at lunchtime. It's just not there.
No. And I also tell my clients, if they're out and about, to go to either a restaurant if they can and just get some beef burger patties with some cheese in the middle, or even, at worst, go to McDonald's and get the 1/4 pounder beef patty burgers with some cheese in a little container.
Even from McDonald's?
Like, what? Yeah. Look, honestly, I would rather eat that than someone go and have a full KFC burger or something like that. So when they're like, I've got quite a lot of people who are on the road that I work with, and if they're not prepping the night before and they get up some cold steak, and it's quite funny, people go cold steak with salt. I'm like, don't knock it until you try it.
Love it. Yeah.
Right. And even eggs, right? Boiled eggs, like so easy, tin of sardines, as long as they're not in olive oil, because you really don't know if that's also been mixed in with canola. But it's just about understanding that when you eat a certain way like this, always focus on protein, because that's the most dense, satiated, where your brain will turn off, whereas sugar turns everything on, and you just end up just hunting and looking for glucose every day. And the other thing that's quite interesting for people, which creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance in the health industry world, is that there is no essential carbohydrate that a human needs to function, right? That's what your liver does, because it'll create the glucose that you just need for whatever point in time you need it. I know carbs taste great, but they're also not good for you.
Yeah. I mean, there's the prevailing view that carbohydrates is your brain energy, and it's your brain fuel, and glucose is for the brain, and and you put it, and I guess in the short term moment, it's like it's crack for the brain. It's like, well, I mean, crack is crack for the brain, but like it'll spur you on in that moment.
It is.
Same with caffeine and any of that stuff. I mean, it's set up to facilitate this. The society that we're in, where we need to function at the whim of something else, not our own bodies.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because we're very in a world now of total dopamine dominance. We're in a world where with social media, it's instant. Food is instant. You don't even have to leave your house now. Someone delivers it to your door, and you're just constantly, your body and your dopamine reactions just firing all day. And then your cortisol goes up, and then your melatonin doesn't work properly. And then people wonder why they're not sleeping. And then you wake up and all you want is sugar. And it's all a massive cycle, but it can be broken. And it's what I call developing new neural pathways away from those really unconscious behaviors. Becoming conscious in what you're doing. But if you're fueling your body with rubbish, you're not going to function well.
Absolutely. I mean, knowing that you don't know, and knowing and being aware that something's wrong is the first step.
100%.
And you mentioned earlier, like psychiatry is focused, or like modern psychiatry and modern psychology is focusing on, here, the head.
Correct.
And could you talk us a little bit through a little bit more how you view, treating things like depression and anxiety and these mental health issues through gut health?
Yeah. So a lot of the time, like even 16 years ago, I'd have people come to me that had been in therapy for a long time. And, I'd say to them, has anyone ever explained to you how your mind and your brain works? And they're like, nope. I'm like, okay, can you tell me now, please, what you eat? And they'd be like, what? No one's ever asked me that, right? And I'm like, well, it's pretty important. And also to understanding that gut is literally the fuel house for every single thing that goes on in your brain. So again, it's just re-educating people away from, again, the narrative that, well, it's actually quite good timing we're chatting, because there was a research study came out last week around the fact that they've actually noticed that there is actually no scientific base on you've got a serotonin imbalance in your brain when it comes to depression. So they've literally just realized that doesn't exist. Whoa,
I just stop you. So what about this whole thing that we're basing antidepressants on this SSRIs,
yes.
And so they haven't been working, or
well, they don't work a lot of the time, and that's why generally when someone starts on a series, it may not work. It could exacerbate them, then have to do different ones. But literally, I'll send you the link to it. Actually, it's a fascinating read, that they've actually just understood that there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain, and all the data is just being based on skewed science, and that there's just been millions and millions and millions of dollars spent in those antidepressants. And also too, Alzheimer's, same thing, it's just been released as well, that there's no correlation between what they've said was that with the medication. So I'd always question it, even many, many years ago, even in my own studies, of going, hold on, if someone's been told they have a chemical imbalance in their brain, have they been for a test? What particular one is it? Is there a dysfunction with the serotonin, or what else is going on? But it's no, I've got an imbalance. But again, with depression and identity, again, it comes back to going, well, are you in situational depression? But if you're fueling your body with rubbish, your body is also going to be depressed. So there's also no conversations around that. And then secondly, depression leading to a part of ourselves that we're very nasty to ourselves. We talk bad to ourselves. We are also, as young children, between the age of 0 to 7, which is what I call our pre-cognitive commitment phase, where we don't have the ability to block out anything from anyone in authority to us, especially the way we perceive ourselves and the relationship that we have with ourselves. So most people that I've worked with, when they've said, oh, I've had depression, or I've told I've had depression or anxiety, if I get them to actually understand what their self-image is, no wonder they feel bad about themselves. Because again, if they're filling their body with rubbish and you go talk to someone about how you're feeling, but then you go home and eat, a whole pizza, that's just exacerbating the issue. But we've got to separate it from, well, what's a poor and conflicted self-image, and how is that showing up every day, and what neural pathway is your mind comfortable with, which again, our minds love familiarity, whether or not it's serving us or not. So we must link back food, fuel, gut to be able to make those neurotransmitters work. And we need the right food to create that pathway. Otherwise, we don't work, and you will get depressed and you will end up anxiety, both from that gut-brain axis and backwards, but also the psychological thinking and patterns that and the way you speak to yourself.
So it's almost like it's a vicious feedback loop, really. It's like you get a little bit depressed, you might soothe that depression with some junk food, and the junk food reinforces, and your negative mind frame goes on, and you end up deep down the hole of depression.
Correct.
Well, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I'm on your side. But like, I have friends that eat a terrible diet, but they're pretty jovial. They're pretty happy. I mean, you never know what's going on below the surface. But is it as cut and dry as if you eat really badly, then you're gonna be negative and you're gonna be depressed?
Well, again, it depends on the long-term nutritional deficiencies, right? So, if I'm talking about a high-end anxiety disorder, that's 15, 20 years of really nutrient deficiency and really harsh languaging to self. And, again, with food, understanding as human beings, we normally link it to pleasure in the beginning because it's a taste bud response and we get that dopamine hit, but underlying root cause is pain. So we have this pain pleasure response that we activate all day. But again, you can look at someone and they have a really bad diet and they seem quite jovial. That's, I'm going to say that most people can be pretty functionally okay, but you know what? Your gut's only going to take a certain amount of battering and then it'll start to break down. So, it's again, if you have a leaky gut for a long period of time and then you'll just start to see symptoms or things start to exacerbate. Same thing with bloating. People say to me, oh, isn't that normal? I'm like, no, that's not normal. And either is, passing wind 5,000 times a day. That's not normal either. So again, I'll always look at, okay, when someone says depression and anxiety, what does that look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like to that unique individual? And again, situational depression is very different to body depression and mind depression. And yes, most people, if they're fueling themselves with rubbish, the serotonin is being depleted. It's not being produced in the right amounts. And we have to be responsible as human beings to know those things.
I 100%. I think the key things that we're missing now, one of the key things is responsibility and taking ownership for your body and what you're doing with it. And a lot of that comes from, in my view, a lot of that comes from blame culture. It's like we're very good at blaming other people, other organizations, the vegans did it, or the bloody, someone else did it, or not to just pick on the vegans, but there are structural things in our society that we point to, and it's to avoid looking within. And again, it comes with addiction and everything, and you're looking outside of yourself to fix yourself.
Validate. And correct. And that's, that's where we're programmed, right? So especially when it comes to people moving away from what is deemed as a varied or a normal kind of diet, we also have this tribe culture where is, you'll go out with a group of friends and what you need to do for your own body. But if your self-image is not in the right space, you'll tend to mold and fit in, right? So if I've said to someone, look, I really want you to go out and enjoy present, but don't focus on the fact that it's all about the food, just be present in the company, but focus on protein. And then when they do that, there's always thoughts, feelings, and opinions that come their way around, oh, what are you doing that for? Like a piece of cake won't kill you. So we've really got to allow people to empower themselves to say, actually, no, I'm okay, thank you. And a lot of people can't say no because they feel quite bad. And that's also, again, a programming thing. But I'll always help people with tools and strategies to say, you know what, no, I'm full. Thank you so much. It just is a very different way of just cutting off. I'm good.
Yeah.
What's on my plate is not a community project. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. But that's also an enabling thing. I mean, people want to, if someone wants to have a piece of cake, they want to have a piece of cake with someone else, and then they don't feel so bad about having that cake. They want to drag you down to the swamp with you.
Yeah, and then you'll just all be there in a carb coma for 3 hours.
Exactly. And they'll go, oh, look at us here again.
Yes. Oh, and then what happens with that is that's where we become that familiarity, and that's where our minds develop that pattern of neural pathway. And another really important thing is we can break those neural pattern pathways to develop a really positive and far more powerful one. But what tends to happen is it's kind of like when a baby's walking, right? When they first start to learn to walk, their patterns aren't there. So they've got to be resilient, and, they fall down and they get up and they fall down, right? They don't just stop halfway and go, well, this is too hard. I'm just not going to keep, I'm out, right? But as human beings, we lose the ability to understand, hold on, if I'm conditioning a pattern that also has a high value of emotional content that keeps me in the comfortable loop of I'm never going to change, I always do the same things. When we start to open up the gaps and the spaces between unconscious and conscious and to redo a new pathway, the energy of those decisions are very low, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, I just didn't feel it. It's just not working. It's like, well, no, because you've always leaned left into the ones that hold the more power that are attached to a negative self-image. So it takes time to actually flip into that, okay, I can still feel it. It might not be as strong, but when you start creating those small habits, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. But again, it's also about exactly what you said. It's full ownership. When you take full ownership at the power that you have at the end of your fingertips and start redesigning that, that's when your life really significantly turns around.
100%. I mean, it's the difficulty that I see with many people trying to change. You know, my experience in the past has always been as a personal trainer, as a health coach, and helping people with their nutrition. And it's that they come in for a session with me and it's 1 hour. Yep. And within that hour, I will slowly try and tell them a few things. We try and change one thing at a time. But they're going out back into all of those habits whereby all of their friends perpetuate the same habits. They like to go out drinking at the weekend. They like to eat cake in the office. They like to eat lots of biscuits. 99% of the structure of their life is propped up by these poor habits. So, and getting them to understand that it's a 2-year plan, it's a 3-year plan, it's a 5-year plan, it's a lifestyle change. It's a life plan. But you know, telling someone it's a life plan when they want to get in and they want to lose a certain amount of weight for a holiday that's coming up, that's the difficulty, because it's a hard truth for people, but it's the only truth. You have to tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, we are a society of externalizing, you know, got to get into a certain bikini for an event. And, you know, then when you get to the event, if you don't actually understand that what your mind's going to do, it's just going to stop and it's going to go back and revert back to exactly the same patterns that you had prior to that. So a lot of people put more energy into an externalized event with relation to their health. They'll diet and they'll do crazy things to get to that without going, hold on. If I create really firm patterns that serve me really well, you don't have to use all of that energy and trying to get in and smack yourself silly for, 14 weeks. Like that doesn't work either. It is a lifestyle decision. Now I have clients that'll go out and, they'll have a bit of sourdough every now and again, and then they'll ring me and go, I feel like crap. I'm like, great. What do you do now? And they're like, I'm not doing that again. I'm like, excellent. Right. It's empowering the choice. But if you want to feel like a bit like sluggish after a wine or whatever, it's okay. But because we're not sitting in that negative neural pattern, which will then start the spiral, we're just in conscious awareness and going, I chose that. Now I feel like that. I don't like it. And then it just becomes a foundation of support, both mentally and physically. But, as you know, in the space you're in, food and diets have always been used to shrink your body, not to serve your body through mental health.
Yeah,
first.
I mean, shrink or augment or change in some way.
Opposite with men,
opposite, the outer shell.
The outer shell, correct. And, anytime you use, even with the word carnivore diet, like I don't tend to use that word. Only a diet for me doesn't have a resonance to it because I've never done it. But it's more about when someone's like, oh, I'm going to go on the carnivore diet to lose weight. I'm like, let's check in with that diet mentality first, because what's going to happen at the end of it, because it's never going to be sustained. How about we look at your mental health first, your physical health, get all that in alignment, and weight loss is a side effect of that, when you fuel your body correctly. And I will say, coming from a background of bodybuilding and having, that carbohydrates from a glucose response, fat adapted body is just something that once you're there, you will never want to move away from it. Being fat adapted is just the most powerful way to operate and train I've ever experienced.
Really. And that ties in with, without trying to say diet, ketogenic diet,
being in ketosis. Yeah. So because I'm zero carb, right? So my body is pretty much fat adapted in ketosis. And again, ketones is your brain's most preferred fuel. And, if we go back to what we're talking about before with your liver, and it makes, glucose through gluconeogenesis, your body will only ever make the amount that you need, because they're smart, right? It's never going to use an over surplus. Whereas when you're using external glucose, you generally, people eat more than they need. And then that's when the insulin goes up, and then you've got to have that blood sugar control. And your brain is most people say to me, once they start removing that and going down to a low carb or into a zero carb, like 1,000 light bulbs go off in their head. Like that's what I've been explaining. It's just amazing.
The irony is, in most of the blood sugar charts, you see it's actually even the lower end of the spectrum that you get to when you do start cutting out all these carbohydrates. They're saying is like low blood sugar, you need to have some glucose, or like, you're going to keel over. And it's that perpetuation and the medical dogma that goes through, with people who go to a trusted person. They go to their doctor as a trusted person to understand about their health, but it's too wide a spectrum. In my view, you go in with a sore ankle and the doctor will say, do this. You go in with, an issue here or there, and it's one, what do you call them? Like a general practitioner should not be advising on nutrition, really, and should not be
they're not qualified. They're not. Like, I'll always say to people, especially in this space, your cholesterol goes up, but again, we've been bombarded like with meat, right? Cholesterol's bad, and total cholesterol, it's like, oh, they're going to put you on a statin. If you actually don't get a doctor that understands that, high total LDL cholesterol is not the issue, and we do need cholesterol for our brains. There's so many research studies around depression and low cholesterol, and you kind of think the amount of statin use that's being used, we're getting sicker and sicker and depressed and more anxious. So, I think the dots are kind of pretty clearly seen, but you're right. Most GPs are not qualified in nutrition. And, I've had clients that have said, oh, my doctor said it was okay to eat Nutri-Grain or Special K because it has protein in it. I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe just find someone else that did. Yeah, no, back away. Yeah. And also too, like all the people that I work with, so all the people that I use are all carnivore doctors and low carb doctors, because they know how to read the charts. They know what to look for. They know what a triglyceride is and what that needs to be. And if you go to a normal GP, they're going to scare you. They're going to go, you need to get off that. It's going to kill you. Yeah. But meanwhile, the American Cardiac Association came out about two months ago and totally blew the whole saturated fat thing out of the water in relation to heart disease. So it's there if you want it, but it's also understanding that there is spectrum in relation to sitting in a box when it comes to either mainstream medicine and psychiatry, for example, versus, hold on, let me just go and speak to someone who's living and breathing this and is actually qualified in both, either nutritional science or whatever it may be. But even a lot of, dietitians are also, being educated now through the dogma of plant-based, nutrition, and don't have too much red meat.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you look back at the pictures from like the 1940s and the 1930s, and you're like, I can't see anyone fat there. And I remember
in the 1970s.
Yeah, 70s. And I remember my grandmother especially, it's always butter and meat, and
that's where I learned to eat organs.
Yeah. And they had to, because there was less availability of stuff. And I was saying to someone the other day, like in all these places where you didn't have the ability to grow crops all throughout the year, you had to, like an animal, as much as you hate to say it like this, but it's a store of energy, and it's a store of nutrients, for hard times. And the rebuttal is always, well, we have all these plants now and we can distribute them anywhere. But I was thinking, in the last 30 years, have our bodies really adjusted to be able to take this stuff?
Well, it's interesting where, again, you look at most vegetables now, then they're not natural. They've all been developed out of, something else and genetically modified. But again, if you think about the soil, and this is why Kiss the Ground is such an amazing resource, is the soil has to be actually loaded, with magnesium, potassium, and all these amazing nutrients. But then when they're sprayed, that all dies. So we're literally growing plants, unless you're growing them out the back, and you know exactly where those seeds have come from, and you know what's in that soil, and you know what you're spraying them with. Other than that, the minute that they're cut from the ground, they die every single hour that they're not in that root cause, right? So for me, I always look, and how I kind of help my clients understand is what is the most dominant nutrition that you need for your health. And if you want to add in some asparagus and some spinach, as long as you don't have an oxalate issue, go for it. But again, listen to the feedback. I had a client that loves spinach, and she's like, yeah, but it's really healthy. And I said, yeah, but you've got these really funky aches and pains. Just take it out for 30 days and let me know what happens. She had an oxalate issue. Yeah. So again, it is educating people on the fact that just you've got to look past the surface. And, a very good colleague of mine always said, plants are trying to kill you. And he's actually a carnivore doctor. So, and it is true with a lot of people, plants do damage to your gut. And even Dr. Georgia Ede, she's a psychiatrist, nutritional psychiatrist, and she even was going through her own kind of issues, and she took out plants, and guess what happened?
And when you say plants are trying to kill you, I mean, is that a reference to things like phytic acid and like their defense mechanisms?
Lectin, their defense mechanisms. Yes. So that's what a lot of other people don't understand. They have chemical structures in them. They don't want to be eaten, right? So again, human beings have one stomach. Cows have 4. So they have the capacity to break down all that cellulose, right, in the grass, right? And that's what most plants are full of, is chemical reactions. They've got oxalates, lectins, all of those things. Now, some people can do okay with them, but other people, it destroys their gut. So it gets back to what is proper for a human to eat mentally and physically, get back to strip back down foundation, protein and fat, and let's slowly add stuff back in and see how your body reacts, get real feedback. I just popped now in my head a client in Italy, terrible addiction to bread, very depressed. So we got her off that. And then about 6 months later, she was like, I might just try some, and landed her straight back into a really heavy, not great psychotic feeling. So she's like, that's really not good for me. I'm like, no, it's not. And gluten, no one should be eating gluten either.
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. My mom has been off gluten for a long time now. She had issues with gluten for a long time. And it was, I think she got to it's got to be late 30s before it was even suggested that it was a thing, where she did a gluten test in the NHS, and then that came out as she was intolerant, and it was far less known then about any of the stuff. And she used to be able to get bread on the NHS, this sort of gluten-free bread, as a prescription, but they stopped that now. But God knows what was in that as well. I mean, you see the gluten-free section, and again, like it's a halo effect of people who say, oh, well, it's gluten-free,
gluten-free, but it's like, look at the ingredients. Like a lot of them, you can't even pronounce them.
Yeah.
But it is just about going, I have even got clients that can't even eat fructose, right? Because it just sends them off on a frenzy crazy of wanting more. And I haven't eaten fruit for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm not dead. And I haven't eaten plants for over 2 years, and I'm not dead.
Yeah.
and that's the other thing. It's like, you're going to get sick. I'm like, I'm all right. I know what's going on.
Not yet. I mean, I have to say, caveat, like I do love vegetables and I love fruit, and I am in that, it's a I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't do any of the other things. So like, it's kind of my go-to like little hit. So
you know what I always say to people, Finn, you've got to be very conscious in the fact that what serves you. And, if you're going to have something like, if you love some broccolini, have it, but we've got to get out of this attachment pattern loop of, what's good, what's bad. It's only got to come to what's going to serve me at my highest good. And if I know something's not serving me at my highest good, then we need to relook at the attachment to that and what else we can, actually put in a healthy habit versus just I can't have that biscuit. Well, no, we can, but how do you want to feel after? So I really get people into really honoring their feelings and serving themselves. So if I eat that certain pasta dish, that I'm not going to feel good and I'm going to want to go to sleep. So I'm like, okay.
Exactly. Being prepared for the consequences.
Correct. And owning them.
Yeah. So if someone's in a position where they're considering this and it's kind of new information to them, what's the best way for them to go about it? Are there any tests they should have done? Is there a particular methodology you suggest, without going to, obviously step one will be giving you a call and booking for a session, but
having a chat. Yeah.
But aside from that, if they just want to sort of experiment with on their own, like how would they go about that?
Really what I get people to look at is, where did they learn to eat what they eat? So where do we learn that from? Are we kind of looking at the shiny lights and the colors and, this kind of methodology of balance? So if you are feeling down and flat, you have no energy, you're dragging yourself out of bed every night or every day and you're not sleeping, and, if you're having too much coffee, I'll always say, have a look at what you're eating. And if you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's another challenge, because breakfast, lunch, and dinner was made up. So we should only eat when we're hungry, not when we're eating by the clock. Really look at the dense nutrients that you're eating. So again, cereals should never, ever be put into anybody's mouth. So if you're eating cereals, you really need to look at why. And I know because it's sugar driven. And we've been led to believe that cereals is an important part of the day. It's not. I'd rather someone go, you know what, I'm going to have some eggs or bacon, and I had eggs and steak for breakfast, right?
Delightful. Perfect.
Amazing. Now I probably won't eat now till probably 4, maybe not. But again, it's just about people going, okay, if I don't feel great, now I've got a psychological attachment to that also, but how am I feeling that every day? Really have a hard look at what the amount of processed foods, sugars, artificial sweeteners, colors, what are you drinking? Are you drinking a lot of the sugar? If you're having Coke and Sprite and all of those things, like toxic. Seed oils, again, is one of the most critical things that I always get people to look at. They're highly inflammatory to your body. Stay away from them. But also canola oil, as you know, Finn, it's in everything. They put it in everything. So really the first point is to say, did I know that nutrition will fuel a lot of my behaviors and thinking? A lot of people don't know that. And secondly, if you've got some unhealthy thinking, like we said earlier, we can reach out, we can have a chat and just kind of get to those root causes. But I really want people to really look at the choices that they're making and understanding, well, hold on, where did I learn it? And is it actually really good for me?
100%. And I mean, I love that introspection there. And I'm just curious, do you advocate any supplementation or anything on that nature, or you're just, because sometimes really, in Mexico, because I'm in Mexico, some people who've been listening before know that I'm based here, and it's sometimes very hard to find good quality offal.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, look, I know people who are on a carnivore way of life that don't even touch offal. That doctor friend I was talking about before, he just eats meat, doesn't supplement. He's also a neurosurgeon, so he's pretty on it. Again, the only thing that I would possibly recommend, say for a woman, for example, if she had PCOS or anything like that, obviously getting rid of inflammation, sugars and things like that. But there is an amino acid powder that I do recommend with some people called myo-inositol. Which is an amazing powder that actually just helps regulate nervous system, but also great research in clinical data for anxiety and depression. So that's why I do use it. I use it myself because I've had some fibroid issues a little while ago. So that shrinks them. And it's great when you have coffee, because coffee also deletes inositol out of your body. So as in vitamin C, there is meat in vitamin C, and because I'm not eating any processed sugars or any kind of chemical structures from plants or pesticides, none of that nutrients are stripping out, right? So again, protein powders I don't believe in. I just think most of them are full of toxic fillers. I know that there's one in the US, I think that Dr. Sean Baker has kind of been looking at, which is a beef protein made from beef. I don't know what brand it is.
There's one, it's called Carnivore. And I was looking at it the other day. And that one in particular had a load of, I think there are quite a few coming out with beef protein now. But right. I looked at that one particular, again, like the availability of supplements in Mexico is not where it should be.
Okay.
And it was that was, like you say, lots of fillers. I'm always looking for anything without flavor, because it's always the flavor enhancers that they put in that. And I would advocate anyone who's buying supplements is just to go flavor free, and to have it. If you want to add any flavor, you know, I would go with either a little bit of juice or something. Sorry for the carnivore advocates out there, but a little bit of juice or a little bit of something. But you know, it's all the flavor enhancers in there that are just unnecessary.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it also comes back to someone's gut health, right? So if someone's really bad, they've got a leaky gut, and there's kind of, you know, different kind of things that we can kind of put in place. But I'll always, whenever I work with anyone, if they hadn't had bloods done, always get bloods done with someone that I, you know, refer to, that I can trust, and just really look at all the levels and your ferritin and all those kind of things, and how we can kind of get all those levels up. But I'll only ever take, say, for example, a vitamin C powder if one of my kids is sick, or there's, you know, something going around at school, and I'll just take a teaspoon of that powder and that'll be it. But other than that, I just get all of my nutrients from my meat and my offal. Yeah, pretty much.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful soundbite to end on. Natalie,
and I get my bloods done too, Finn. So I kind of just keep an eye on it, and, you know, and I'm fascinated with those kind of things as well. So,
it's I guess on that note, we've got a couple more minutes. What particularly?
Sure.
What particularly are you looking at in blood work?
So basically, triglycerides, you know, I'm just more curious around what my LDL is, just from a, you know, what marker it is, ferritin, your iron, FSH, depending on, you know, from our female hormone, that kind of thing. What else? Oh, vitamin B, B12. Yeah, all of those kind of profiles. But again, you know, being a carnivore, you know, that's never an issue. But again, also too, if you're supplementing with B12, especially being a vegan, there is different types of B12 that you need to really look at, that is going to be more susceptible for the body to break down, and not a kind of a cheaper version of B12. But again, you know, I always say to people, and it's kind of like, if you're over supplementing, that means that your nutrition is not on point. If you've got to take a whole bunch of pills, there's something out of whack.
Yeah. A lot of people
do it. And it's expensive.
It is expensive, and a lot of people do it as a they think it's an insurance policy. But I was looking at the vitamin D, high strength vitamin D that you get in, I think it was Costco, and they were 500 UI, and 5,000 was it IU, and the bulking agent in there was canola oil.
Canola oil.
And I was just like, this is just like one good for one evil. Like it's
well, it's the same thing, you know. I always get people to look at, you know, full of them. They're all full of gluten and wheat a lot of the time too, right? Even with chocolate, I'm not sure about what you guys have over there, but, you know, some of my clients were like, "Oh, what's a really good quality chocolate?" I'm like, "Well, you're not going to eat 99% cacao. I'm telling you right now. It's like paste. It's just like bleh.
It's bad. I've tried it.
But again, same. Just out of curiosity more than anything, it's like, no thanks. But also to being a carnivore, right? And as you would know, taste buds change. So anything that's kind of out of the kind of species appropriate mouth, you're like, no, body doesn't want that. But a lot of the chocolates here full of gluten and wheat. Yeah,
it's crazy. It's very hard to get away from. But Natalie, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your middle of a Monday for you.
In the future.
You're in the future. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm recording this on a Sunday evening, and Natalie is in Australia in the middle of a Monday. So time traveling. But thank you so much for coming on. And I'm looking forward to seeing more from you in the future.
I love it. Thank you so much. What an amazing chat. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.